la tempête arrivait, c'était pour 5 ans, la tempête de 99, on en parlait aujourd'hui
Ouais,
qu'on a pu le...
l'otard. Bon, l'otard, c'était quand même... c'était chaud, non?
You're on air, I think. Is it working? Yes. Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to the Tavola Aperta. This is one of the 3 special projects that are part of this year's International Art Exhibition, Viva Arte Viva, curated by Christine Massel. And it's an occasion to have a convivial and informal talk with the artists over a lunch. So I would first of all like to invite all of you to participate in the discussion, because this does not want to be an exclusive talk between me and the artists. Our guests today are Thu van Tran and Julian Charrière, who I want to welcome first of all, and I hope we'll have an exciting conversation over the lunch. Thu van and Julian are both exhibiting in the corridor at the Arsenale in the Pavilion of the Earth. Julian is presenting an installation entitled Future Fossil Spaces, consisting in a series of hexagonal salt columns, where he focuses on the relationship between contemporary civilization and the world of geology. Thu van is instead showcasing 4 different works, which all raise attention. Well, they're all based on one material, rubber, from both the historical point of view and the human, natural, and sensorial views. I don't know how many of you have already been to the Arsenale and seen the work. Some of you, but not all of you, right? So I would like to start the talk by asking both Julian and Thu van to tell us something about their work exhibited. Maybe starting with by Thu van first, because ladies come first. So,
as you said, the 4 works are linked by the rubber that I invested as physical material, but also as a material that could be linked into history. I'll try to, yeah? And so, first of all, we could face a kind of landscape on the wall. So I proposed landscape of contamination made by rubber. On the wall, I'm showing 3 photograms of tropical plants that I brought with me from several trips I made through Vietnam and Amazonia. So the leaves and the branches were exposed into photosensitive paper. And a sculpture that consists on several tree trunks cast by wax. They're all coming from the same rubber tree from South Vietnam, and film shown in a double projection that is investigating in the first part the workers' gestures, and in the second part the same gestures petrified into sculpture.
and you, Julian?
I'm showing a large installation made out of salt. It's a special salt because it's actually the bottom of a sea, which was taking place 30,000 years ago in the highlands of the Andean Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia. And these salt bricks are actually the negative of a small mining facility in Uyuni that I visit in 2014. I went on like a trip on the traces of lithium, and I was more interested in the photographic aspect of lithium production between Atacama in Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. But once I was there, I kind of like start to develop an attraction for the material itself and actually for the negative space of mining production. And what you see in Arsenale are actually sold pillar from 10 to 520 centimeter high, hexagonal shaped, and in some of them there's like aquarium filled with lithium brine, which have different color and kind of activate the sculpture. And it's kind of like more of a surrounding or environment you can go through. And yeah, basically that's like the work that I'm showing there.
So a question for both of you. Why did you choose these specific pieces for the show? Did you discuss it with Christine? Did you choose it?
For my case, it has been a long conversation with the curator, and she wanted me to invest the nature as a topic of a project, and so I was working on rubber already, and she pushed me like to investigate more different shapes linked to rubber. So
it's also because you have there are four different works, and you use four different techniques because you use both, let's say, painting, even though actually you stain the wall. You use photographic paper, you use film, and you also have the cast trunks.
Actually, for the photograms, I think we are talking much more about sculpture than photography in itself, according to me, since the photograms has a molding process. You expose directly the object on the paper, which is for me 3D action, I would say. So yeah, I mean the medium, I could say that the medium would be more the light and the imprint than the painting or sculpture.
Yes.
So.
I think in my case we were very quickly came to the decision to show a new version of a work that Christine saw in Paris. Because we had this vision, and she had the vision even stronger, that this soul and this brick would actually kind of like embrace the space of the Arsenale very well, because there's a certain haptic in the space and become kind of even more like a part of the building, or there will be like a nice friction between the work and the direct special surrounding and the special quality of Arsenale. And so we actually start to discuss more like which form could take this work in the space, instead of like more talking about which work we could actually exhibit. So the piece is a new piece, but it's just like a new version of an older series of work. Yeah.
Yes, and your piece is a new piece done expressly for the exhibition, right? Does anybody want to ask anything? Could you please just use the microphone, because otherwise we cannot hear anything? Could you? Thank you. It's on. I think it's on. It works. Okay. No. Okay, we've got.
I saw yesterday both the two. I remember very well. They impressed me, but the most impressive was the salt sculpture, and the question about lithium. May you explain me better, because I can't understand if in the water there is some lithium, or the water is also only salted water in the aquariums.
Well, basically what you see in the aquarium is actually lithium brine. So it's actually the sea which evaporates over the 30,000 years and create this salt flat, and under the salt flat the sea is still existing. So by processing the lithium, they're bringing the brine back on the surface, kind of reactivating the idea of the landscape itself by bringing this kind of archaic water on the surface. And then they concentrate it by evaporation through sun energy. And what I did is that I brought back some of the brine, and then we concentrated at the studio till you get this color. The color are actually depending on the chemistry, the chemical composition, if there's some manganese, if there's like some chlorure, and I just want to include them because, as I said, at the beginning I was much more interested in this kind of like very bright and some unnatural color that you will see once you're going around Atacama, because there's a huge pool of evaporation. So you have this dry surface and these amazing, brilliant colors. And I wanted to do a photo series, but then at some point I just decided that photo will not be the media, because I'm working a lot of different media normally, from photography, installation, performance. And I just decided that the sculpture would be a better way to kind of express this tension within the material, because it's a very long sedimentation process, and lithium is actually something which gives us the possibility to extend ourselves, and it's something which is much more bound with an idea of immateriality, like the fact that we're mobile, the fact that we kind of like an expansion of our body through time and space. And then there's like this heaviness of sedimentation, crystallization of the year and the year that the material have been going through till it get to this state. And yeah, that's why I actually choose to use those components in the sculpture. And then the sculpture is kind of like slightly dictated by the landscape itself. So there's some geographical or like physical idea, which are actually directly like kind of an observation that I made on the spot. And then I decided to create this modular architecture, which I then built over there as kind of like a live process. I didn't have like the final idea or model of what it would be, but it was much more like a process-oriented kind of like play with the elements in the arsenale.
Okay. Anybody else? So how did you bring the salt? How did you get it, first of all?
Well, I mean, I was there for 2.5 months, and I was very interested in this small facility because I've been going to a lot of mine.
But you stayed 2.5 months in the desert?
Yeah, yeah. And I've been to a lot of open pit mine, and like the scale of mining operation over there is like irreal, and some are very interesting because of like this idea of negative space and monument, maybe monument of the Anthropocene. And this lithium production, they're very different. They're like family businesses. So there's 5 people working on a small plant, and I actually just went and discussed with them if I could get the waste product of production, because they're cutting the desert to create this pool, and what I get is just the negative of one of the pool. And well, I organize a transport. I mean, there's like trucks, there's like everything. They need to get the lithium out of Bolivia. So I actually fill the container with big block of salt and bring them back to Berlin. And then we start the process of material itself to create those bricks. And then once we were here, we start the process of building the sculpture.
So is please.
Oh, well, obviously it stays stuck at the German border for a bit, because 22 tons of white material is always a little bit
coming from
sketchy
South
coming from South America. So yeah, no, we had to scan it, and we were, for the first time I showed the work, which was for my first show in Lausanne, Musée des Beaux-Arts de Lausanne. We had a big stress because of the deadline and the salt getting stuck and having to go through scan and scan and scan. So that was kind of a problem, yes.
You didn't have to use the diplomatic.
No, we managed. They have like they could see through though. So, but yeah.
Also, you also bring back. Do you also do field trips? I know that for this work, especially for the trunks, you went to Vietnam
to select
to select or to choose the trunks.
I was interested in former Michelin plantation, rubber plantation in South Vietnam. Still available plantations today, but now Vietnamese. And so I took from one of the more violent plantation. I mean, in terms of privacy, of liberty, and violence to the coolies, the workers there. So I went to this plantation named Phu Ring Màu Đỏ. Màu Đỏ in Vietnamese means the red. So for the color of the earth, of course, but also for the revolts that appeared there in the past. And so from there, I brought back a tree trunk to my studio, and then I molded it, and I cast all the sculpture elements you've seen in the show from the mold.
When did you start deepening? Because there's a whole history behind the rubber. There's a history both of colonization, of exploitation.
And when you retrace the history of rubber, you could revealing the domination of our modern history, of course.
So when did you start being interested in this? When did you start deepening the history of rubber? And
I was looking for an object that could link both countries, Vietnam and France, and then I discovered that the seed of the rubber tree was transported by French sailors. And actually, when we think about rubber, we always imagine that it has been exists forever in Southeast Asia. Actually, it wasn't.
It was imported by the French.
And the seed came from Brazil, and then the first plantations appeared at the beginning of last centuries, and the first latex, the first rubber that has been collected was completely available for the market, and so Vietnam at this moment decided to leave all land to French occupation, I would say like this, because then they would be able to build the plantations, and at the same time Vietnam would win in a natural richness forever also. We say it in French, un cadeau empoisonné, something like this. At the same times you have something, but then the beginning of the discord is happening. So I've been just looking for those plantations in Vietnam, but not only, also in Brazil. And so I went through Amazonia to look for a former Henry Ford plantations also there.
So you both...
Yes. Have you any pictures?
No, we don't have any pictures here. It doesn't want to be a conference style, so...
But you went to Fortlandia.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Ah, okay, you didn't see it.
Is it difficult to
Yes, basically in the installation there are on the floor there are wooden boxes over which you can find wax rubber tree trunks. To say it in just a few words.
Yeah, you have some crates, and on the top of the crates you have the tree trunks. And so, Fordlandia is the name of the plantation of Ford, and so I've been there, and I brought with me one Ever tree, and it's the one that was exposed in the blue photosensitive paper that you
Okay.
could see. You could take it then.
Thank you.
With
And-
your finger, you could also pass the image. Huh?
And you also decided to on the photographic paper you expose both leaves from Amazonia and Vietnam, so you sort of link together
Yeah,
the
it's two different parts of the world
world.
with two different light, I would say. So, and so, yeah.
But they do have a lot in common, especially in terms of exploitation of natural resources, and both related to like your work, like the Uni Desert, which is exploited for lithium, but also the plantations of rubber in Southeast Asia. So they do have things in common, maybe. I don't know what you think about it. No?
No, yes, sure. We're both traveling to some spaces and also like kind of walking on site in something like field work, but I will not say field work because field work is always kind of like connotated. I think that's something much more emotional about the type of study we're doing or the type of like interaction with the places that we visit. And something much more subjective as well. But then we're also, I think, both investigating quite deeply into certain mechanisms and trying to deconstruct them and show them maybe differently. So yeah, I think there's like by these two work, even one is
No, they're completely different, but
very
maybe
similar
there are
somehow
some-
in the way we.
Yes, please.
Maybe this kind of fits into what we're talking about, but you both use materials from a place really far away from Venice, and I'm curious about, you guys know the context of those materials, like scientifically and just like how they exist in the place they're from, but the audience doesn't have that context, so I'm curious if you worry about removing these materials from their context, or how you try to communicate context when you put those materials into a gallery space?
I think we paid attention a lot to the sensitive experience of the work. So I would say you don't need really like to approach thoroughly the material. Then you could ask for and read, but first of all, what you engage into a kind of submerged space, and you're facing a visual and abstraction, I would say. So, I mean, it's double. It's like at the same time you open the field of an aesthetic experience, you also open a page of a discursive moment. So it's up to you then to open that.
Yeah, I think also this type of work is not the material being like a direct ambassador of the place, like in kind of like an exotism where you bring something back and this is representing the space where it's coming from, like the kind of construction which are built here in Arsenale, they were standing for themselves. So you don't need to have like the complete background, I think, to appreciate, to get like an interaction with the work. And I think that's quite important because it's not about bringing exponents and just displaying them in maybe intuitive but deductive way. It's much more about like building a kind of a fictional space at the same time, but which is bridged to something else. So that's just make like I mean, when you go deeper, then you get probably more out of it. But I think it's always very important that you also can engage very simply with the work without knowing all the background.
Anybody else wants to ask anything? Yes, please. Can somebody hold out a microphone?
Thank you. Julian, well, we saw both of your works on Tuesday. And what I was amazed by was were people going in and out and through all of your work and entering and leaving in different places. So the ability to sort of come in to different passages and different moments, I guess, how do you, when you're constructing it, how are you thinking about that movement through the space of your work?
Well, for me, the work itself, like the material, is kind of like a compression of time and trajectories, because the lithium with those lines is actually crystallizing a huge timeline, which is a different kind of time scale that we are in. And I think that this way of going in a type of labyrinth, I mean, if I would have the possibility, I would have done it much bigger, so you lost yourself completely, and a kind of repetition of pattern and models is like the idea of, like, the very pristine idea of labyrinth is actually a space to erase time, because in any direction you're going, like forward or backwards, you always see the same. So it's kind of a eternal repetition. And I think like in the work, it's something that I try to, like in the frame that I could walk in, because there's like a lot of rules at the Biennale. People need to go, I mean, like there's some constraint. So I try to work on some paths, so you could like actually also kind of like embrace this idea of like geology and like this drill core, this vision of the different strats, and also the idea that at some point the leftover of a society will be just a small line. I think that's very important. They're kind of like a DNA for me, like each column. But I don't know if this is clear.
Anybody else? So, to go a bit back, when did you decide, realize you wanted to become an artist? To go? Because you're both quite young, so I wanted to know how did everything start? When did you realize you wanted to become an artist, and why?
Want to start?
How did you get here?
Well, I cannot talk just about myself, but I think that as I was at high school, I wanted to do something where I could communicate. But I think that word always have been something fascinating, but maybe also too restrictive in terms of media. And I decided at some point to become an architect or a cook. And very quickly actually understood that maybe I could cook the architecture, or kind of like make something which open more dimension. But this idea of like communicating concepts in space, or building my own story. And then I decided to study art. I didn't know what it was to study art. I just saw, that's be like the biggest freedom to actually express myself. But I had no clue, because I didn't have any artist friend. I didn't know what is an art scene. But it's like it is, like, when you're like 16 and you need to decide what you're going to do with your life. And I was quite lost at the time. Well, I think I've been lucky it worked out.
And you also studied in Berlin with Olafur Eliasson, who is exhibiting also here. Tell us something about that experience.
That was amazing. It was a special program between the Einstein Foundation, the University of the Art, and Studio Eliasson. And I've been very lucky to be in Berlin at the time they start this program, and they take me in, probably because I was doing a lot of things outside, and that was something which interest Olafur. I was the youngest of the class. And I mean, I think the very strange or very beautiful thing that we had is that he managed to create a group about sharing, and I think that's something very special in an art school, because normally you're much more like individuum, kind of sharing a space, but we were sharing a space, sharing ideas, sharing interests, and kind of sharing life, because we were a very small group, and he put us in a lot of different situations. I mean, we would travel a lot. It's also maybe the moment where I kind of like understood that traveling could be a tool for my own work. And we've been like with the whole class in very strange situation where you had to re-understand all the rules and your surroundings, so something a bit like situationism. I mean, we just put in some situation, we don't know the language, don't know the culture, but we as a small group, we had to react, and obviously we also had to walk. So, yeah, that was the Institute for Spatial Experiments. It was a good time. Still all my good dear friends. So it's very beautiful.
And you too, why did you decide to become an artist?
So I grew up in, let's say, lower class. My parents worked a lot. I've seen them working all day long, and so yeah, I thought life could not be only this kind of things. I was touched by details and some beauty that I was just the only one who's seen that, so I decided I have to go further with that. My subjectivity is to the details that catch me at this moment, and so I knew quite soon that I'd like to pursue that.
Okay, and where do you work? How is your studio? How is your everyday practice as an artist? Do you work alone? Do you work with many people?
Yeah, depends on project, but my studio is in suburb Paris, and it's a two plateau of 100 square meters, and so I work there with assistants, depending on the scale of the project. So I also worked at home, I mean, with my books and my sketches and my friends.
And do you do collaborations sometimes?
No,
No.
not for now. I did like a curatorial project 2 years ago with a curator who was Jean-Marc Scola. We were involved into Marguerite Duras' manuscript and archives, and so it was a really nice collaboration where we extract from the Archives Institute Marguerite Duras' manuscript to present it in a physical relationship, I would say. Yeah. So it was the only moment of a collaboration.
Okay. Yes, there's a question there.
Yes. From where? Or how many? How does it start? The idea for one creation. You understand?
Yeah. Well, it depends. Normally, like the last project you're working on already kind of like give you maybe a direction for the next one. I believe so, but I mean, I'm
During the night, during the
always when I'm sleeping and then I wake up. Now, I mean, I think like a lot of reading, a lot of traveling. I think that reading and traveling are pretty similar in terms of like emptying the brain and being able to be more sensitive to your surroundings, or you travel by reading, or you read by traveling, or both way.
And how many time how many time quanto tempo passa?
Could you please use the microphone? Nobody is hearing.
How long from an idea to another one, maybe?
La creatività, cioè quanto tempo passa?
From the idea and then the creation.
I think it's very depending on which project. Mostly, I would say that when I'm starting to work on something, it's normally at least a year before I'm actually starting to produce any work, and I'm starting to produce some work, which actually will evolve in some other forms. And normally it's like a few years. I'm kind of busy with something, but then I'm having more than one on the go, and yeah, it's a little bit of management. But maybe you can also say something about how
About time.
well, about how you are getting to your subjects.
There's no method. Sometimes it's fulgurant, you have something very fast, and sometimes it needs researches and failures, and then years, according to the project. I mean, there's no one way to follow, I would say. Also, as I said, for some projects you need to work with many people, like depend on the scales, and some works you need to be just alone, focusing on some gestures you have to make alone in the studio, so depends.
And how do you and where do you work, Julian?
Well, I'm working in Berlin in a shared studio with 5 other artists, which we all study together and stick together after the studio.
And how does a shared studio look like?
Shared studio is it's nice, but it's very chaotic, and we all have assistants, so it became like a huge community. Sometimes it's 50 people at the studio. If like everyone having a big show and bring like 10 people in the studio to work, and it's like a mess, but it's always a very nice creative mess. So I think also like dialogue is a big part of my work. So it's also, I think, to be surrounded by people which are inspired and which you love is always a big plus. And fortunately, we not always having 5 big projects at the time. It's much more like one is in residency, one is working, so we managed to actually make it work. But it's a lot of, there's a big plus of having all these people, but then there's like definitely a downside. It's more logistic. If you like in stress, when it's not only your studio, you need to kind of deal with, like practicality.
And also, I know you collaborate sometimes with other
I
artists,
collaborate a lot,
especially
yeah, because we're just sitting around there and working all day long, and sometimes at night, and sometimes not sleeping, and sometimes we kind of like forget who was the idea coming from. Was it Julius or was it mine? Well, we do it together then.
Yeah, because you collaborate a lot with Julius von Bismarck,
Yeah,
right?
we're just sitting next to each other, like in front of each other, listening to a phone call.
And for those of you who don't know, they did a project together here in Venice in 2012, right?
Yes, we paint some pigeons.
Called Some Pigeons Are More Equal Than Others.
Exactly. So we built a small cage, which was a trap and a small kind of painting apparatus, where a pigeon will fly in and get sprayed with harmless color, they're like food dye, basically. And so they will get out and they'll be wet and clean themselves, and then be red, blue, or yellow. It was a kind of a way of re-understanding the urbanscape. So we did it before Venice in Copenhagen. It's like bring some little error in the everyday life of the people living in the city. And then in Venice, it was, I think the Biennale was common ground. And a friend of mine was doing a pavilion which was called Uncommon Ground. And he actually asked us if we wanted to be a parasite of his pavilion by bringing those colorful pigeons in the city. So.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you both a question actually about exhibiting at the Biennale, and if it was your first time, and how you'd found the process, and in terms of responding to the concept or the theme, but then also how you found your work now situated amongst so many other different artists, and do you feel differently about it, or has it developed anything in your thinking? Or I'm just really interested because it's such Venice is such an interesting phenomenon in terms of gathering people from all over the world and work from all over the world.
I've been learning a lot, actually, from the setting up, seeing my colleagues working, how different also we were at the work and we were with our team. And so I mean, I think I would have worked the same in a museum or in a gallery project. The Biennale didn't really change my way of working. Of course, the Curatorial Project did, but yeah, as I said, I work with the curator, and so I would work the same with different curators in different places. What makes the thing different? What made the thing different for me was the architecture of the arsenale in itself, and how it's kind of a negotiation with the bricks, the columns, the heaviness of the history, and the yellow light, warm light. And so that is more a fight or a negotiation, like how your work would deal with the space. And I was really happy also to hear that, first of all, that the project was dedicated to the artist and made with the artist, because for me was I really lived it like this, actually. And so, not in terms of being completely free to work and supported by fundings, and no, it was like, I think it comes from one person, which is the curator, and so we worked well. I mean, for me, it was a project that I could build from the very beginning to the end. I'm very happy to be back here and to see again the work yesterday. I was like very touched by, and discover the whole other works. And I would have done one work, but then the curator proposed to add more complexity in my project by adding different shape of memories, and how I could propose a kind of landscape that stick the contamination and then petrified a tree into memory shape, and then an imprint into chemistry, and then the light catching some images from another region of the world, and producing some image that coming from archives or not, actually not, because I showed them, and was like it was a decision to make a journey into the memory in itself, and I would not have done that without her, I think. So.
And for you, Julian?
Oh. Yeah, I think it was a great experience. I would say a little bit of the same. Like, the biggest challenge was actually the space of the Arsenale, because it's not like a space you used to walk in, and it's so present and powerful that it will dwarf any artwork. So it was complicated to kind of find, but then we embraced it by also letting like the wall row. We didn't put like any white board in the back of the walk to actually kind of like deal and integrate the whole project. And I think that was like, working with Christine was very, very nice. And as I said, and I had like a rough idea of what I will do, but I also came with all my tools. I think I was the dirtiest artist of the whole setup, because we were cutting salt. People were to drink liter of water next to me. We were listening to 90s techno. It was kind of like a very...
It was the messy part of the...
like salt was spreading out, like salt is used to do, like the process of desertification kind of happened within the Arsenale by just going a little more and more and more. And we had like, it was complicated to contain it in this big open space. But I think at the end everybody enjoyed. So maybe the plans of Michel were not so happy about the soul, but they survive. So
May I say something? During the preparation, I thought, oh, who will propose some columns to the Arsenal space? And you did it, so I was happy that we were next, actually. Because first of all, I was also thinking about dealing with the space as reproducing columns or an architecture that could not only dialogue, but fight in a way with. And so,
Yeah.
nice.
So, yes, please. There's a question out there.
It's a little question to both of you. You both have chosen materials that seem so elemental, very simple, like salt and latex, whereas a lot of artists get quite seduced by expensive metals or high technology. Did you enjoy, is it something that you always work with? Is it, and you sort of create a magical world that allows us to see really quite universal and complex ideas from some simple things. Is that a generating seed for your ideas?
Yes, I think I'm always trying to use maybe not simple material in terms of what is in the material hidden as kind of information, but simple in terms of like not mixing too many things, because there's like an inherent complexity to a given material. I mean, like a stone is can be very complicated, I think, even if it's the easiest thing on earth, but like it's very complicated to understand the stone, and I think that if you add too many layers, you maybe lost the point. So I always try to reduce, and I always like to actually work with something which have like an haptic, like something that's tangible somehow, which have a weight, which have like a presence in space. So it's probably redundant in my works. And I kind of like minerals a lot for different reasons. And so it's the salt just came, and like salt is like the basic of all the alchemical constructions. So there's like plenty of different links that you can do.
I didn't really understand the question, so.
So your work comes from latex, like the sap of a tree, and the whole work generates from something so simple.
Yeah, of course.
And is that common in your work? Is that
Actually, for rubber, I don't know if you have seen once a trunk breeding, because this experience is unique. You could see like something coming out of the tree as ever, like it was in the past for centuries ago, and something so simple could stand so strongly your mind and your memory. The whiteness coming out of the tree is like a pure instant of beauty and fragility at the same time. So I have seen that, and something stands my mind. So, and that was the beginning. And it was an aesthetic experiment, first of all, for me.
And may I ask, was there a strong decision to lie the trees down or not stand them up?
Yeah. Yeah. Because the river was stolen from continent to continent. And so I wanted to create a landscape of lying trunks, like recreate the feeling of a lost landscape. Yeah, I wanted them lying on the ground first. And then we decided the crates to refer to the idea of the transportation of richness from continent to other continent, and the exploitation. And also the crates. I did a first version of this work many years ago, very different, but I used crates that refer to our memory and collective memory directly to graves. And so it was the link I wanted to propose, but not only. It was also the rail crates that transport the tree trunk from my studio to here. So.
Are there any other questions? Yes, please. Could you please the microphone?
How to use it? Yeah. I don't know if it's already a little early, but you still already have 3 months. Looking backwards, what would be your feeling, your relation, or maybe your awareness of the relation between this actual work you're showing and your previous work? Is it a step or just another example of the thread or the different walks you are trying to walk down? I don't.
It's both.
What?
It's a step, and also it's the result of a project. So, yeah. For me, it's also a concretization, of course. But it's a step. More far you go, more far you want to go again. So it's like.
Yeah, I think it's like an achievement of a quite long process, because I've been working in this thematic like over 3 years with different sculpture, photography, different body of work, and like to have it now here, I think it's kind of like I see like kind of a final state. So I'm very happy. I'm also very, very happy to come back. It's always nice to rediscover it, because we install it, and then the opening is very hectic. There's no time, and now you're coming back with kind of like another regard on what you've been doing, and also how the different other work kind of start to resonate together in space. So it's also a very nice thing to be brought back. I mean, we would have done it probably anyway to take down, but also this here allows us to come. I think that was also a very nice movement from Christine to allow each of the artists to come back and sometimes to be together and having this round table and kind of re-seeing the Biennale with new eyes.
Yes, there's a question
Thank
here.
you. What will be happen with your work? Will be your work going to a museum or going back in your space where you work, or you have a collector that is buying your work?
Julian might have a story about a collector for his...
No, that I will not tell. Well, first they will come back to my studio. Probably will be exhibited again. Not sure yet where and when, but normally each of the work I'm doing kind of like tend to be in movement, which I think is nice and important that they're circulating. This one is not the easiest to send around because it's quite heavy, but it definitely be exhibited, and then maybe I will have one or another collector which is interested into this work or part of it, or maybe institutions, or there have been some interest, but there's nothing like very clear yet. Anyway, it will first come back to my studio, I think.
I have the same answer for you, but I ask you, do you have some sponsor? Because it's very expensive to bring your work around the world. So you have people that is sponsoring you? You like the institution, private institution, or state institutions?
I mean, the work itself is not cheap to produce, for sure. Like, to send around is not particularly expensive. If you think about a small painting going from here to America with an art transport, be much more expensive than bringing 22 tons of salt from Bolivia to Berlin. So that's like container shipping is rather cheap, and that's not a work which is too fragile. So I'm not really using the art shipper, and And but for sure, I mean, I'm working with galleries. I have 5 galleries which are supporting my work. I have institutional support. I had support here also, like private collector, which kind of help. Then the Biennale, Pro Helvetia. I mean, there's like plenty of people which support this adventure here and make it possible, basically. But I don't think that sending it around is complicated because it's very much Euro pallet boxes. You know? It's like take the forklift, put in a truck. The big thing is to actually rebuild it, and yeah, that's a lot of work.
What will be happening to your work after Biennale?
So the work will be stored in my gallery storage, actually, in Brussels. But the project will be shown. The whole project will be shown at Moderna Museet of Stockholm. The Contamination would be double scale for 40 meters long, as a perfect window in the museum, and yeah, pure landscape of Steen. The trees also will be shown. Actually, the photograms, they are editions, so some of them are acquired already, and so also so I have people that follow the project and want to propose them into some public commissions. So
Okay, so does anybody else have questions? Are there any more questions? No. Well, I have one last question for Thu, actually, because Thu van,
yeah,
sorry.
Which
I always
means
which means
autumn clouds.
Autumn clouds.
Yeah, and
It's
so if you
beautiful.
call me Thu, it's just autumn.
I know literature plays also a very important role in a lot of your works. So I wanted to ask you to tell us something about that, because I also know one of your works is actually a translation of, you translated Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So, but it's not the only work where literature enters your work. So I wanted to know something about that.
Yeah,
how does it affect your work? How do you relate with it?
Yes, works start with words for me, so it could also start with a line and a drawing, but it used to be with words much more, and so what is important to me, since I'm working with words, it's how I could bring the words into a shape, a visual shape, and how I could give experience of the works and an experience of the lecture, the reading and the speaking. And so it's a question about how to materialize words and speech, which is something like has to deals with memory, and you hear something, it could stay so long in your head just because you have heard it once. And so this is powerful enough, like, to touch me and to makes me think about a way to materialize the word. For the translation I made, I assumed completely my relationship with writing and my lack of comprehension of the English language. So at the same time, I was reading, I was writing, and so it's a complete subjective translation as an art process, I would say. So it's part of my work. Yeah, and as I said, I was involved into the Marguerite Duras manuscript, and so the project was to embody her topic into a scenography for the reading and the understanding of the text, so, and also narrative. It's something precious, and so it also goes with words for me.
Yeah, because there's also this, one of the other 3 special projects is Unpacking My Library, where Christine asked all the artists to select a few books which are, for some reason, significant to the artist.
And I only propose a novel, actually.
You only proposed?
Novels.
Novels, yes, exactly. And what
Fiction,
did you propose,
narratives.
Julian?
I think I propose Bunker Archaeology from Paul Virillo and Hyper Object from Timothy Morton and Un automne à Pékin. And I think it was 5 now.
Yeah. And are these like books that are really important for you, or?
Well, I mean,
it's
I have like a lot of books, so it was a hard time to actually give 5, and that's why I'm not really 100% sure what the 2 last were. But yeah, it was the books that I was reading at the time because like of this project and another one in Kazakhstan, and I think that's why at this moment they appear. It's like over a year ago, and it appeared to be very important, and it's still important. But I could tell like a lot of other books which could get into the library, but I think they're all there somehow.
Yeah, some titles repeat themselves from one artist to the other.
Oh yeah, J.G.
At
Bala,
least,
Terminal Beach as well. Yes.
Yeah. And what about the artist practice video? Because Thu Van's video is about doing the stains on the walls of the Arsenale, right?
Actually, no.
No?
No, I asked a filmmaker to follow me and to propose what he'd like to do. So he spent days with me, and he asked me to bring him into my childhood place, what we've done.
Yes. Also.
And he wanted me to give to him some archives, visual archives of my work. So he made his own edition. Also, editing, sorry. And also, he asked a young curator to ask me 3 questions. And so
but you also did a video of you throwing the rubber on the, which was very interesting to see how you did the stains on the walls of the Arsenale. What was curious for me that the liquid rubber is easily confused for paint when it's in the liquid form.
Yeah, it is why it's very impressive at the beginning, because you immediately think about painting, and so, but actually you removed it easily because it dries very fast, and the rubber is like a skin, and so the skin could be removed. Yeah, easily.
And what about your video? Where was
that? My video was
a
decompression stages in the back of a boat in the Bikini Atoll, where the American Navy have been at-home testing a few years ago. And yeah, because it was about the artist praxis, and I kind of like the moment when you get back from 65-meter diving, and then you had to stay an hour in suspension and degaze because you have all the liquid nitrogen in the blood forming some bubbles, so you don't want to boil out. And I think that's something which is very similar to some moment of artistic reflection. Sometimes when you're like not very sure about the direction you're taking and you don't want to degaze, and I like the idea of floating and being between 2 atmospheres, because like each time that you're going 10 meters deep is like 1 atmosphere more. And so it was just this little video where I'm just on a scaffolding in the water, waiting to be allowed to go up without dying.
So, does anybody else have a question, or? Well, otherwise, I think we all had coffee, and it's already past 2. So I want to thank Thu van Tran and Julian Charrière for being with us today and for sharing.
Well, thank you for coming. All
and
of you.
of course, thank you to all our guests for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the exhibition. Thank you, everybody.